Thank you for taking the time to watch this episode of Life Support. If you enjoy the content, we would ask that you like it, hit subscribe, and share it with your friends. Hey, I'm so glad you've joined us on Life Support. What we do on this program is we love to tell stories about how Jesus intervenes in some of life's more difficult places. He is faithful, he is good, and this story that we're going to talk about today is right along that same line. Naomi Wright is my guest from beemboldened.com. And Naomi, thanks for stopping by again. We had a great conversation not long ago, and it's so good to see you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be back and continue the conversation with you.
One thing that we were talking about right at the end of our time together, you talked about messy, and you talked about a professor that was warning you. And, it seems like whenever anything's worthwhile, and we're going to talk about topics that are kind of hidden under the Christian rug, it's going to get messy. In my own life, I had a son who was murdered. I don't like talking about that. I had a wife who died. I don't like talking about that. I'm a victim of sexual abuse. Don't like talking about any of that. But God's always saying, got to talk about it because others need to talk about it. And when you're telling your story, it must be very, very difficult to even go there. But yet you're doing it. Tell me how God got a hold of you and said, Naomi, I want you to talk publicly about this kind of thing, the upbringing you had and so forth.
Hmm. I mean, he knows the steps to take with us, right? He knows what we need first. And first, he ensured that I knew that he loves me. And that's not something I grew up with very strongly. It was a lot of wrath and fire and brimstone. I mean, I was raised in a doomsday cult, would be the classification for it. And so there's not a lot of goodness available to people in a doomsday cult. And so, and not that there was none, but yes, it's minimal when we think about the theology. And so stepping out of that, I really came to know God's love and his patience and his goodness and his kindness and all of these incredible attributes that he shows to us, despite us, being undeserving of them. And so moving forward from that, when I got to this place where I felt like it was time to share my story, I was in this posture of, I would want to do that. I would want to glorify you because I have this deeper sense of who you really are. And yeah, of course, I want to speak to what you've done in my life because I know that I shouldn't be where I am right now. I hear that from people. They're like, how on earth are you Christian? I shouldn't be Christian. And I would argue, honestly, I shouldn't be alive because I know in my mid 20s after my mom died, I would have taken my life. I know that. And so I shouldn't even be here, let alone have a family and have a son and have this ministry that I get to be a part of and have conversations like these. And it's coming to know who God really is that set me up for, yeah, absolutely, Lord. I want to proclaim you publicly. And in doing so, I'm gonna have to talk about hard things. And yet in that, I'm wondering if you've seen that yourself. He continues to offer me deeper layers of healing. And so I continue to be blessed through it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also find that each time is its own spiritual battle that I grow from. And then Satan always circles around afterwards and says, well, you didn't say this, you didn't say that. Who cares about that? And it just becomes, but it's all a growth experience, right? Because God is helping us to learn how to do it better. And I really admire the fact that you're willing to be so open. Now, some of the clients that you deal with at Be Emboldened, what kind of general experiences are they coming out of that you're helping them with?
So everyone that we come alongside has a connection with spiritual abuse. So they are either someone who has experienced it themselves or they have a loved one. And so they're coming alongside someone. And so we love to support the supporters as well, kind of, caring for the caregivers. And so there's some connection in that way. And I think about it as sort of a spectrum of from kind of church hurt all the way through that kind of off the grid, more extreme sorts of experiences, which I think I probably get categorized into. Again, I've had a bit of a buffet, and so I appreciate now that I'm able to speak to different kinds of experiences. It's so funny when you have these awful things, you're like, oh, well, in a way, I'm sort of glad because I can talk to this person in a more nuanced way than I otherwise could have. That's redemption right there. So that's God bringing something good out of something awful for sure. And so people have that in common, this connection with spiritual abuse. So it is spiritual abuse exclusively that we serve in. But aside from that, there's quite a bit of variety of what people have gone through. There can be the character issues that we can see in any level of leadership. It's not necessarily a senior pastor, it could be someone who is heading up the volunteers, it could be a mentor. We can see spiritual abuse issues within the household of one spouse over the other, not always necessarily the male. We can see spiritual abuse again in more extremists. We definitely do see a lot of clients who have come out of cults. We actually have cult leaders that we've come alongside where they've stepped away, which is one of the most exciting, incredible things to be able to witness because I can attest to it. They mean it. It is real, true repentance that they are going through. And the biggest struggle is actually helping them to see that they actually can receive Christ's forgiveness because they beat themselves up so hard. And so there's quite a range, but again, that common thread would be people have experienced some kind of abuse or they know someone who has, and they're wanting to figure out how to support them or someone who is currently. And well, how do we keep the door open for communication? Because I know this isn't the truth of Jesus.
Yeah, I lived in Arizona for a long time, and we always heard about these weird people that lived up near the Nevada border. And, we heard about those kind of cultish people, and we all know about David Koresh, and we know about all these things. But what you're saying is that this is very real. Like this stuff exists in our culture today. And I know if as a pastor, if somebody walked up to me in church and said, I'm coming out of such and such, I wouldn't know what to say. I mean, how many of us are educated enough to even know how to begin, right? And that's a wonderful thing that you're doing because I would feel lost.
And it's completely fair that you would, because I mean, this isn't stuff that we're just trained on. And
Yeah.
so it's something that we seek out because what? Well, we've either experienced it or we know someone who has, and all of a sudden we're like, oh my goodness, I want to learn more about this. And I remember just kind of general knowledge of, okay, there's no way I'm the only one. So I wasn't elitist enough, coming out of this group to think, well, I'm the only one who's experienced something like this. No, I knew I could not be the only one, but I don't really know anyone else myself. So how do I kind of go about this? Like, where will people come from? And as I started being emboldened, started speaking about it, started writing about it and sharing, I was blown away by how prevalent it actually is. So we have over the past year, we've had clients on 6 different continents. So everywhere but Antarctica. I don't know how many countries, but I know it's been on 6 different continents. And such similarities in the stories and in the experiences, some nuances, of course, but a lot of similarities, a lot of common threads. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is so prevalent, not only in the United States, but worldwide. And even within the United States, I've been shocked. I keep seeing like sort of these themes of I'll get a bunch of people from Ohio who reach out, but different groups, or a bunch of people from Arizona who reach out, but different groups. And I keep thinking, oh my goodness, this state is saturated. But I have so many states in my mind at this point that are saturated with these kinds of issues. And something that really threw me for a loop is Anna Kitko, who's a part of our team. She's with Ratio Christie and she's a part of our team at Be Emboldened. She's talked to me about how many compounds there actually are in her state of Tennessee. And I'm like, my goodness, this is a really big problem. And then when we add the sorts of things that unfortunately, kind of we see in the news, like these heartbreaking situations in our mainstream churches, these different character abuses, character failings, and things like that, I'm like, oh my word, we have a lot of support that we can provide, and we have a lot of education that we can give, and that's good. And so there's a lot of possibility for change, and there's so much hopeful for change, because as I mentioned in our previous episode that we did together, this still isn't primarily what I think we're seeing. I think we are seeing people who truly love the Lord, who are desiring to be like him, who are desiring to shepherd well, come alongside others, for us as sheep to love one another as well and companion well. We just need more equipping on how to do that. And that's something I really care about for Be Emboldened too, is how do we equip others who are already doing really good things to make this be a part of their repertoire. Like, I want this to be an area where people are also confident, so they can refer to us, but we can also give them some equipping so they feel more confident. And I think there's a lot of room there. And I'm very hopeful for the future.
Naomi, as a pastor, we all want our churches to be safe places. We want people to be able to come here and whatever they're dealing with, to be safe, to be able to heal. When it comes to spiritual abuse, what are some things that we can do to create that kind of environment where someone would feel safe enough to, number one, even show up and stay? Number two, to actually step forward and have the courage to say to someone, I'm really struggling.
I think talking about it, I think back to when I was first walking into a church, and I was really scared to do that in a lot of ways. I was scared because of the theology that I had been taught, that all actual church buildings were filled with sinners and the demonic and all of this stuff. But I was also really scared because I didn't know who to trust. And I think that's something that can resonate with people across the board, across the, the buffet of experiences. And when we walk into churches and we know that there's language around these kinds of things, it lets us know, one, okay, they believe that this really happens, because that can be a battle. I've run into that even as a representative of Be Emboldened, where churches are like, and again, not the norm, but it does happen, where they're like, well, spiritual abuse, like, that's people just being convicted. They don't like it. They don't like feeling convicted. Now, people can claim that something they don't like is abuse. That's not what we're talking about here. That could be a different conversation, but we're talking about different kinds of behaviors that would actually constitute abuse. And so, having language maybe on the website, because something we coach people to do is take a good look at the website first. If they have sermons up on the website, listen to those first. Like, gather what you can. It's sort of this easing your way back into it. So, kind of dipping your toe in, like, gather the information you can, make your list of questions, reach out, ask to sit down and have coffee with someone or have a meeting, get those questions answered. So, we're equipping people to take steps like that. So, on the other side of it, if the churches and our parachurch organizations put out there publicly, hey, this is kind of our stance on spiritual abuse. Maybe they have policies around it. Maybe they have steps people can take, and certain people that they would go to if they want to connect with someone. If we have language around trauma, what we believe trauma to mean, that we believe that it is a real thing, how we desire to support others. Hey, we refer out, or we do this, or this is what we offer. I think starting to show those things in the most easily accessible way possible, the lowest risk way possible for those who are maybe wanting to approach the church organization, the body, that's going to be huge for people to think, okay, there, if I need to share, if I need some support, they're going to, they might not totally get it, but they're going to be open to the conversation, and they're not going to silence me and shut me down and turn me away, essentially, whether they actually turn me away or I feel like I have to duck out.
Sure. So you're just saying basically normalize it as much as you can. Don't be afraid to talk about it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And even talking about things like that from the pulpit, mentioning stuff like, hey, this stuff happens. If there's anyone out there who has, like, we would love the opportunity to support you.
So coming from a different angle, as I'm talking to you and being a spiritual leader, I get scared because I know my own heart and I know what the Bible says about my heart. My Bible says my heart is wicked. You know, I can deceive myself very quickly. How can a spiritual leader make sure, in your opinion, that we're not part of the problem?
Such a good question. I love that question. Something that I take very seriously for myself, because I recognize that too. And so when I founded Be Emboldened, I'm like, It needs to be a 501(c)(3) because I need to have oversight, and it needs to be legitimate oversight. I need actual oversight, where they really are going to have a duty to care, where they're going to check, they're going to listen to stuff. Because if I ever, God forbid, go off the rails someday, I want people who are going to catch it and get me off the platform before I harm people. And
Yeah.
so I think that's really important to make sure that we have those five closest people to us, that elder board, whatever it looks like for our organization, that we really truly are seeking out people that are going to hold us accountable. And I remember a pastor who I've partnered with in some things telling me he stepped into a new senior pastor role at a new church. And he was looking at the bylaws for that church organization. He's like, the senior pastor has way too much power. And so he actually worked with the elder board to rewrite them to limit his power. And I'm like, that's a church I want to attend, because it's not all about me. It's not all about the person with the microphone. It's really about everyone. It's about the church family. It's about Christ, and it's making sure that everyone is safeguarded. And I think those checks and balances that we can put into place are really important. And I think that there's something really healthy too about having regular check-ins with like an external source. And that's something I've been thinking about with Be Emboldened as well. Of let's do what I tell clients is I call it a temperature check. And it's like, okay, if I'm going to take my internal temperature, like, how am I doing? Where am I struggling? What's going on? Where's maybe like a weak point right now where I'm just not feeling super rooted? And just being able to have that internal reflection in a way that is going to externally impact those that I'm serving. And so encouraging leadership to have opportunities to do things like that too.
Yeah, that's good. And not to be afraid to get help if you need it. It used to be, that you'd have to drive 45 minutes out of your town to go see a counselor or a therapist because you didn't want anybody in your church to see you walk in. But hey, now we can just hop online in the privacy of our office. It's easy to do. I find it really helpful to get outside perspectives of people that I can trust and I can talk to freely. And I'm glad that we have those resources now. We didn't used to have those, so why not take advantage of them?
Right. Absolutely. Well, and I'm a huge proponent of we all need people. And
Yeah.
for anyone who's experienced spiritual abuse, you might be like, I don't want people. And I understand that. And there's again a time and a place for what this can look like. But ultimately, we are interdependent. I didn't eat anything or I didn't have water today without other people. And so I know we're interdependent. We have that interconnectedness. God designed us that way. And we anyone who's stepping into a leadership role. So whether I'm talking to parachurch leaders right now or church leaders right now, there's a huge gap between perfection and abuse. And I tell people this. I'm like, we're of course not looking for perfection. That should go without saying. We can be imperfect and not be abusive. So anyone though, when we're like, we're all being sanctified and okay, we don't want to be abusive. Of course, we're not going to be perfect in this life. We're not going to attain that. We want to get as close in that direction as Christ-like as we can. That's going to be a journey. In the meantime, I'm going to need support. Like I'm still growing. I'm not done yet. I'm not, if Jesus hasn't returned and I'm alive, then I'm not done yet. And so I think also those of us who are looking to leadership, knowing what the lines are, what are the actual flags, those red flags in character and in theological, biblical concerns, what are those flags? If we see a flag and we have a conversation with leadership, how do they handle it? Sometimes it's really a blind spot. Leadership's going to handle it great. I've seen it happen, and it's a wonderful healing experience of, oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. And they really take steps for change. This is a really beautiful opportunity. And I'm not saying, again, someone who's just experienced abuse should be the person to take on that role, but I'm just kind of going macro level here, big picture examples. If you have something specific, please reach out to us. I'm happy to happy to nuance that with someone. But we are leaders. We need to give them room to be imperfect, not be abusive, but to be imperfect and to encourage them to, yeah, absolutely get support. We all need that. I think we need to we need to rehumanize humanity when we're talking about leaders.
Yeah, that's really good. I like that. All right. So beemboldened.com. What kind of services do you offer there?
We offer services for those who are desiring to prevent victimization as well as re-victimization for someone who's already had an abusive experience. They want to make sure that it doesn't happen again, do their best to kind of build up that knowledge and that equipping to safeguard themselves. And when I say that, I always like to clarify the abuse is always on the fault of the abuser. At the same time, if we can learn more about those tactics and make sure we know how to read our Bibles well, there are some things we could do to hopefully prevent someone being able to capitalize on us in the future and exploit us and take advantage. So we offer services like one-on-one mentoring services, where we come alongside individuals as well as people who are supporting someone else. So if you are someone who has a loved one who is suffering or someone who has suffered, maybe it's someone who's currently in an unfortunate problematic experience, whether it's a cult or not, and you're like, how do I keep the door open for communication? Or you're someone who has experienced something directly. We love to come alongside people either one-on-one, two-on-one, if it's, someone and a friend or a spouse or a loved one, groups of people who have come out together. We offer digital courses of curriculums that we have written to rebuilding after religious abuse is one of them. Can I, which is the 7 most asked questions about God and Christianity, and rebuilding with biblical literacy. So 2 of those are coming out later this year. One's already out. And the goal of those is to, again, make it as low risk as possible for you to get some good, solid equipping. And all of this from the lens, the perspective of people who have had the Bible used against them, people who have had Jesus used against them. This is hopefully a corrective experience, not in a disciplinarian way, but in a healing from trauma and seeing that the narrative that we were taught through the abuse experience is not the only narrative out there. And it's not necessarily the majority narrative out there. And so offering that to people so that they can heal. So that's where we have focused. We offer a monthly membership option for people too. So there's a lot of great stuff to check out on our website, continues to grow. And our next endeavor that we're starting to step into, we've got our first couple of churches that we're working with over the next few months. We're going to start coming along churches, parachurch organizations, and other support professionals so that people who are already doing really incredible work out there in the world can add this to their area of expertise.
Good for you. So it's beemboldened.com.
Yes. Be as in be emboldened.com.
Naomi, thanks so much for visiting with us. I know you're busy. It was nice of you to stop by.
Wonderful to be here. Thanks so much for having me.